I'm a 20-year-old woman that lives on the West Coast, and I've lived here for about 8 months. This happened within the first month of my time here. In most bigger cities, restaurants are partnered with delivery apps. The delivery for these apps tend to frequent the restaurant in which I work at. Typically, I see the same 5 to 10 delivery people multiple times a day and get to know them pretty well. Except one. He only came in while we were busy and always tried to talk, and in annoyance, I would always ignore him. But one day, this man came by to pick up multiple orders. I gave him the food and turned around, barely acknowledging him. That is when the questions began. I should have seen the warning signs then. "You don't even want to say hi to me?" he said to me with a smile. The kind of smile you give someone that you know well, and the kind of smile that is meant for friends. The way that he looked at me threw me off, but I gave him a smile and said that I hoped he had a good night. He rolled his eyes and went to put his deliveries in his car. But then he came back with his phone and told me to put my number in it. I politely declined his offer and began to turn around. "You won't regret it, Charlene," he said gently, pushing his phone into my hands. At this point I was extremely uncomfortable, but the restaurant was empty besides the chef in the back of the kitchen, and I couldn't get his attention. So I set his phone down and did what any person would do. I wrote down a fake number on a napkin. To my own horror, he picked up the number and began to dial it in his phone. He put it up to his ear and rolled his eyes in frustration. "Just give me your real number," he said. I then wrote down my real number but with no area code, hoping that he would be okay with that. And I had just moved here recently, so my area code would not be easy to figure out without knowing of my life before the West Coast. "Charlene, you didn't write down your area code." My heart started beating quickly. I had never given him my name, and I never wore a name tag. "Pick up the phone when I call, and if you answer, I will leave the restaurant." I could tell he meant it. He would not leave until I proved to him that it was my number. He called, and the phone vibrated in my pocket, and I knew that I had made the worst decision of my life. I showed him the phone, and he left. I loved my job, but the worst part was the distance. I always took the bus home and had to make multiple switches in order to get home, and it was typically an hour commute. This was not a problem during the day, but by the time I got off work around 11, it was risky. About halfway through my commute, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered out of curiosity, and partly because I thought it was someone asking me to cover their shift the next day. But the voice said, "Oh, babe, you didn't have to take the bus home. I would have driven you home. Someone as pretty as you should never have to do that. What are you doing tonight? Do you want to come over? My friends are with me. We can come to your place." I quickly hung up the phone. When the bus reached the stop about a block from my home, I was lucky enough to see that my neighbor had been sitting near the front of the bus, and I was able to walk with him back to our apartment building. For the next 2 weeks, I received 10 calls a day at least, and maybe 15 texts, all of which were increasingly strange. Most of them were just about how pretty he thought I was, but then they began to make me extremely fearful. He began to offer me money and tell me that he could find me a better job, suited more for a girl like me. He started coming in more for deliveries, and finally I told my boss what was happening. The next time he came in, my boss pulled him to the side and warned him that behavior like this was not okay, that if he did it again, we would report him to the delivery company that he was working for. He stopped for about a month. At this point, I had picked up a morning job too, and I would begin walking to work around 5:30 a.m. while it was still extremely dark. On this particular morning, I was so paranoid that I did not turn on music, and I was always looking around, looking for people behind me. That is when I saw him. He walked up next to me as if we were friends and put his arm around my shoulder. Every alarm in my body was telling me to run. "I've been waiting for you. Let me walk you to work. You won't regret it." How did he know that I had gotten another job too? I declined, telling him that I needed to do homework and turn into the cafe that was closest to us. I made the workers aware of the issue, and they allowed me to stay inside until he finally decided to leave the area. That's when the private calling began. The frequency of the calls began to pick up, and he would leave angry messages. In my mind, what I did next was a good idea, but I quickly learned how wrong I was. The next time he called, I answered the phone. When he asked why I never made an effort to talk to him anymore, like I even ever had, I told him that I was gay, and that there wasn't anything wrong with him, he just wasn't my type. "Just give me a chance. I can change you. You never had a man treat you right. You won't regret it." Things stopped for a while. There was a text here and there, but about a month ago, I began to get weird comments on my Instagram posts. Wow, so beautiful. There are so many things I would do to you. Stop ignoring me. I'm trying to treat you right. And many other comments of this nature. I blocked him and he would make a new one. He would then call me again a few times and leave a few long messages that I would try to ignore. I stopped taking the bus and made sure everyone between my friends and family were aware of the situation, just in case anything ever happened to me. Then on Valentine's Day, he showed up again at 3 a.m. outside of my window. I woke up to my name being screamed outside. You see, I live on a busy street and my bedroom has large windows. I had them open this night because of how beautiful the night had been before I fell asleep. I turned over without lifting my head as I knew he would never be able to see me. About every 5 minutes, he would scream my name and say that he could see me and he knew I was there. He told me to come down and talk to him, and right before he left, he said one more thing that I almost didn't hear. You won't regret it. For context, at the time I was a teenager working at a small coffee shop a short walk away from my house as a barista, which involved forcing myself to always be bubbly and smiling, despite the idiocy that transpires before some people get their coffee. As a result, I've had a few experiences where men take friendliness as flirting and try their luck on me, but no one as creepy as this guy. He came in on a late Sunday afternoon shift when I was working alone as my coworker was far too sick to be touching food and went home early. He was dressed in an unassuming leather jacket and jeans, and looked to be in his early 40s. After ordering a small coffee and paying with small change, he started to try to hit on me over the counter, and I just brushed it off and handed him his coffee. Then he tells me he recognizes me and that I must be from around the area. I've never seen him before though, so I kindly laugh nervously and deny it, but then he gets weirder. Then I've definitely seen you on campus. Do you go to blank college? I say no, given I've never heard that name before in my life. Well, how about this college? Nope. Okay, definitely this one then. Still no. This goes on for over 10 minutes and he's listed at least 8 different schools that I've only recognized one of, and it's clear that there's no way he's a student at any of them. Then he moves around to the small door that opens to let us out from behind the counter to clean the shop, and he tries to get past it to come closer to me. Something really feels off, so I tell him a little forcefully that customers aren't allowed back here. He kind of laughs and makes a comment about how he knows. He's just not a regular customer, and I'm just playing hard to get. I repeat again that no, he isn't allowed back here, and his face instantly becomes serious and he totally shifts gears. So you're probably working until closing, huh? What time do you guys close? I follow my gut and lie and say that we closed around 2 a.m., when in reality it was 10 p.m. given it was a Sunday. And he nods and tells me, then I'll come back at 2 a.m. for you, and he finally leaves. Given I've served some strange people at my time there, I tried to push it out of my mind and focus on my work for the rest of the shift. My manager wasn't there at the time like usual. He only ever came in on Thursdays and Fridays, so I didn't get a chance to bring it up until then. When I did on my next shift, he invited me to come into the office and watch the night security tapes just to ease my mind. And guess what? The creepy dude had actually come back at 2 a.m. in a beat-up Honda on a Sunday night, and the cameras caught him forcefully trying the front door and crouching along the windows of the cafe to try and see past the shades we put down at night. Eventually, he stormed back to his car, which was one of only 2 cars in the lot, and sped off. I have no clue what his intentions were in trying to meet up with the teenage girl at 2 a.m. on a Sunday, but I've never seen him since. So my Psycho X stalker story happened on the west coast of the United States about 11 years ago. I was a 23-year-old female living in my very first apartment. I was single, working part-time, and going to college, so I was more focused on getting my life together than dating. Valentine's Day was approaching, and of course I didn't have a special someone in my life at the time. So a coworker of mine thought it would be a good idea to hook me up with the single guy she knew named Jack. Jack and I talked on the phone for a few days before meeting in person. When we eventually met, Jack bought flowers, candy, and told me immediately how attracted he was to me, even saying that I'm his girl now. Kind of struck me as an odd thing to say as it was our first time meeting, but I thought he was really handsome. He was 6'1", I'm 5'3". He had a gorgeous smile and seemed really sweet, so I just brushed the oddness off. We hung out for a few weeks, and during that time, Jack started acting very strange and clingy. He was very quiet and liked to ask questions about me and told me a lot about his personal life, but besides a simple hi, he basically ignored and never spoke to any of my family or friends who came to visit often. He also wanted to occupy all of my time, wanted to know what I was doing all the time, and would get angry if I was busy or had other plans. He wasn't physically abusive, but really possessive. He even told me he loved me a month or so after knowing me, but I laughed it off thinking he was joking. One night, he actually got on his knees and proposed to me. I told him we had only known each other for a few months and that we should wait until we were both ready. Besides, he didn't even have a ring. He said he was ready to get married as soon as possible. We can go to the courthouse now and that he'll buy me a ring later. No thank you. If it's meant to be, we'll get married when the time comes, I thought. The very next week, he gets back on his knees and proposes again. Still no ring. And saying that he was ready now. At this point, I started to freak out. Not only was he clingy, but he was moving way too fast for me. I mean, we had only known each other for a few months. I was still busy with work and school, so I told him maybe we should take a break from hanging out for a while. He got this really weird look on his face and got really quiet, but eventually started smiling and agreed with me that we should take a break. A few days of not hearing from him, I came home to find him sitting on my staircase. I asked what he was doing there, and he just said, "Waiting for you," and smiled. After an awkward moment of silence, I told him he needed to go home. He got up and left, but then he started to randomly stop by my place. If I was there, I pretended not to be. He would knock for 30 minutes sometimes, leave for a few minutes, and even come back. He started waiting on my staircase for me to get home so much I had to hide in my neighbor's apartment and wait until he eventually left. He called my cell non-stop and I just ignored him. After a couple of months of this, he just stopped all of a sudden. I was completely relieved, like he finally got the hint. About 3 months of not hearing from him, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. I answered and it was Jack. He wanted to know how I was doing and wanted to see me. He also said he told his mother about me and that she wanted to meet me too. I got super creeped out and upset and I told him no, to lose my number and to stop calling me. I guess he heard the opposite because he started randomly knocking on my door again. He knocked on my door a couple times, and each time I had a friend or family member tell him to leave and to not come back, and each time he just smiled and said okay. The third time he came over was the last straw for me. I had my best friend tell him I wasn't there. I was, but was hiding. He asked her if he could wait for me inside my apartment until I got back. She told him no, and then he tried to push his way in. My friend called my name and I ran out to help her shut the door. Heart racing, I told him I was going to call the police if he didn't leave and to never come back ever again. He mumbled something through the door, and then I could hear him walking down the stairs. I ended up not calling the police that night, but I regret that decision to this day. Jump forward about 5 or 6 months later. It was a bright, sunny Saturday afternoon. 2 of my younger sisters, 17 and 14, were visiting. I was still laying in my bed because I had a major migraine. Since I lived alone, I had gotten used to leaving my bedroom door open so I could hear everything. I could hear them watching and talking about Vanilla Sky, the Tom Cruise movie. I could also hear kids laughing and playing outside. Nothing weird whatsoever. I took more aspirin, then dozed off again, but was awakened shortly by a loud bang. At first I thought maybe a kid bounced a ball or something off of my door, but then I heard a really loud bang, again, and my sister started yelling. "What the hell is that?" Just as I was about to get up to go see what was going on, bang again. I heard screaming and then a man's voice yelling, "Get the hell up." I started to panic, so this part might sound kind of messed up, but since I had no clue what was going on or who the person was, I slowly closed my door and blocked it with a dresser. Sat on the floor in front of the dresser and called 911. In my state of mind, I thought it would be much better to get the police over ASAP, instead of risking my life even further by running into an unknown situation. Anyway, I told the operator someone broke into my apartment, and it sounded like he was threatening my sisters and that the police needed to come quick. The operator asked me a lot of questions about how many or what the intruders looked like, but of course I couldn't say because I was still laying in bed when it started. While I'm speaking with the operator, I could hear a guy's voice asking, "Where's your sister? She doesn't know what I had to do for her. I love her." I heard more screams, and then I heard, She's in the room. At that point, my heart started beating triple speed. I don't know why they told this person where I was. Maybe just out of pure terror, or maybe getting me back for not coming out of my room to check on the situation. But next thing you know, my bedroom door was being kicked really hard. So hard I actually thought I had started sliding across the floor. He stops kicking my door and says, "If you don't open the door right now, I'm killing everyone." I was so damn scared, literally crying, begging and asking the 911 operator where the police were. The whole ordeal was only about 5 minutes, but in a situation like this, time slows way down and it seemed like it went on for hours. I guess the intruder must have heard me talking to 911, because all of a sudden he stopped and took off running out of the apartment. I was still on the phone crying with the door shut, and one of my sisters knocked and said it was okay to come out now because he's gone. I opened my door and was like, "Who the hell was that?" They said Jack. I couldn't believe it. In broad daylight, Jack kicked in my door with a sawed-off shotgun and threatened to kill my sisters and myself. The police ended up catching him about a week or so later. During this time, I found out through the police report that there was a previous incident that occurred with Jack a couple of weeks before my incident. The police were called because someone was shooting a shotgun in the air. When the police arrived, they found Jack holding the gun. They asked why, and he said because someone broke into his apartment, stole his weed, and cut the tip of his tongue. Not kidding. The police just issued that guy a ticket, which is crazy in of itself. Anyway, I actually helped catch him by giving them one of his family's members' address that I found in the phone book, and they caught him headed to their house. He confessed right there, but after he was arrested, he pleaded not guilty, but ended up taking a plea deal and only ended up serving 5 years. I moved to a different state after that. An even scarier part is, I found out that when he got released, he moved into a halfway house literally right down the street from my old apartment where he kicked my door in. 11 years have passed and I still don't feel completely safe. I feel at any moment I could run into him randomly or hear my door being kicked in again. I keep moving constantly. I change my number every year, and I carry pepper spray and tasers with me everywhere I go, and I never go to bed without checking if the doors and windows are locked tight. I still even put a chair under the doorknob before I go to sleep at night. A little bit of background. I, 23 female, was 20 at the time. I moved in with my uncle in San Antonio, Texas, with the agreement that I didn't have to pay rent as long as I helped him out with chores and my cousins. I got a job at a super known coffee chain downtown, close to the touristy part of the area. We had a lot of regulars and a lot of homeless people coming in and out. I felt relatively safe though because I got to know the people there and it was almost always a lot of foot traffic. I used to even take walks after work in the area, especially since I was super close to the Riverwalk. Skip to a couple months into the job and I was friends with everyone I worked with. We were all super close. On this particular day, it was one of my coworkers' last days. There were about 3 guys who had been there almost all morning. They hadn't bought anything and were just hanging out, which was not unusual for my location. On my break, I decided to walk down to a nearby drugstore so I could get a farewell card, maybe a small gift for said coworker. I walked down and put my earphones in, and before I could press play, I heard the door open behind me and footsteps following behind. Whoever it was caught up to me and started walking beside me, matching my pace exactly. I turned to look, and it was one of the guys that had been there all morning. He was a bit taller than me and reminded me a lot of Lakeith Stanfield. He tried to ask for my number and I kindly told him no. He persisted, and I, with a short temper, told him to screw off. He stopped and stared at me in surprise, as I don't really look like someone who would speak up. He stood there as I walked away, and by the time I went back, they were gone. I proceeded to tell my coworkers about the encounter, and we laughed it off. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. Every time after that, he would already be there just hanging out, or would walk in mid-shift. Sometimes with somebody else, and sometimes by himself. I assumed he was just another homeless person, because how else was he always able to be around? My shifts were pretty sporadic. Some days I opened, some days I closed. Some days I worked mid, but it didn't matter, he was always there. At that point, I started to feel paranoid. I would always catch him staring in my direction. He never ordered anything, never talked to me, and luckily wouldn't follow me. He would just sit there watching me. I started mentioning it to my coworkers, and they started noticing it too. One of my team leaders would help me out by sending me to wash dishes in the back or organize the cooler. My coworkers would also try to place themselves to try and block me from his view. I started feeling uncomfortable at work. Sometimes when I closed, a coworker would walk me to my car before heading home themselves. Then one day, when he was just staring, I was working the register. He walked up and ordered a water. I asked for his name for the order. I now had his first name. He took his water and sat down. I had mentioned him before to my manager, but because he hadn't really done anything, we couldn't do much besides note it to the manager book. The next day I worked with my manager. It was him, 2 other coworkers, and me. I told him I had to go to the bathroom real quick. There were 2 bathrooms right next to each other, but sort of hidden from the coffee bar and register, and they weren't gender specific. I walked around the bar to the lobby area. I had to pass his table and walk down the lobby to get to the bathrooms. I noticed him get up before going inside. I sat down to do my business when someone rattled the knob. I shouted out that it was occupied, but whoever it was kept rattling the door until I finished. When I opened the door, no one was there, and walking back, I noticed him adjusting back to his chair. I was super freaked out and told my boss. He couldn't go and tell him off though because we had no proof that it was him. Later that shift, he got up and picked up a coffee from the pickup area. My boss assumed he had ordered it and let him take it, but I told him it wasn't for him and that wasn't even his name. My boss used this as an opportunity to tell him if he ever does something like that again, he won't be able to come back. The man apologized and actually stuck to the rules every day after that, but he went back to just watching me. Cut to Valentine's Day. One of my team leaders and I would be scheduled to work certain Thursdays after close to deep clean the store. We would stay until 1 a.m. This was one of those Thursdays. We were almost done and I had to clean the bathrooms as one of the last chores. I finished, and as I walked out of the bathroom, I saw him peeking in with both of his hands pressed to the window, eyes wide, just staring at me with this super intense look. I froze for a second, just staring back. I noticed on one of his palms that is pressed to the window, a purple foam heart. He doesn't move at all. I shout, Hannah, Hannah, he's here, he's back. She barely hears me through the music that we were blasting. Hannah was the team leader who would help me hide from him, so she knew the huge fear I had towards him. She walks towards the bathroom, shouting back, What are you saying? What's going on? I told her again, He's here, he's watching me. She started shouting through the window, You need to leave. If you don't leave, we're calling the police. I step out a little to see if he'll leave, and he's ignoring her, and his eyes were fixated in my direction. I step back into the bathroom, and my leader continues to shout at him to leave and threatens him with the police. About 5 minutes passes by, and he realizes that I'm not stepping out until he leaves, so he does. The next day, my lead and I told my manager I wanted to file a police report. He told me no and to wait until he talks to his boss. He showed up again that day, but I was only there to talk to my manager, and I left right after. When I got home, a friend convinced me to call the police anyway. So I text my boss that I don't care what he says and that I'm scared and I'm going to file the report. I dial 911 and tell them a summarized version. They tell me that they're going to send someone to where I live to take the official report. The 2 officers were so nice and supportive. I told them my whole story and how my boss didn't feel the need to get the cops involved since I wasn't harmed. The officers told me that I should have called right away and defended me, saying that they could get him for harassment. I thanked him, and they tell me that if he shows up to dial 911 immediately so they can take him in for trespassing and harassing. I think that day, my manager banned him and warned him because he never showed up to the coffee shop again. A few months later, when I was comfortable again, I went out with some friends to walk around. We were close to where I worked, and as we rounded the corner, I saw him, and so I ducked into a little corner store and my friends followed. I told them I saw him, and they kept an eye out. Once he was out of view, we left the store, and that was the very last time I saw him. When I was in high school, I lived in a really small town in Texas. It was the kind of place where everyone was either related to each other or hated each other. I had no family there, so yeah. But I did have a pretty blonde girlfriend and was pretty hated for that too. Nothing major, just petty harassment, occasional fights, but it had been escalating. So that's why on Valentine's Day, my girlfriend and I decided to skip the school dance and just stay in and watch a movie at her house while her parents were out. Just better to avoid trouble. We borrowed her dad's car, a little Honda hatchback, and went into town. We stopped at the video store for a movie and went to the Dairy Queen for some ice cream, and then we headed home. Now she lives in the complete boonies, out in the middle of the woods, along a lonely road with no streetlights at all. We're just chatting, eating our blizzards, when all of a sudden a car comes up behind us. No big deal. But what was a very big deal was that when the headlights flooded the interior of our car, I saw two hands in the back seat and a head coming from the hatchback part of the car. As soon as the lights hit, the head and hands retreated back down. A solid chill ran through the entire length of my body. I slowly reached down and pulled out my pocket knife, the only thing I had. She saw me and asked what was wrong. Loudly, I said, "Nothing. I just had to stop at my friend's house real quick." But she knew that was bullshit. I didn't have any friends. I pulled over at the next house that came up and jumped out of the car, yelling at her to jump out too. She jumped out quickly in total confusion. I flipped the driver's seat forward and lunged into the back seat in full maniac mode. He popped up like a jack-in-the-box with empty hands waving. Hey, what y'all up to tonight?" It was some weird kid from our high school who we had never seen in our entire lives, let alone spoken to before. I said, "What the shit are you doing in our car?" His reply was, "I thought you guys were going to the dance, and I was just hitching a ride." We sat there staring at him with our mouths open, wondering what to do. He tried to act real cool, and obviously we were in the middle of nowhere in some random person's driveway, so whatever he was planning was forgotten. We actually ended up driving him to the dance and dropping him off. The whole time he's telling us to come inside with him. Yeah, I don't think so. We dropped his ass off and noped out of there as soon as we could. As soon as he got out of the car, my girlfriend started crying and shaking. She was so freaked out. I have no idea what he was trying to do when the lights caught him crawling out of the hatchback. I got some Dunkin' Donuts this morning, and it brought this story back to my mind, so I figured I'd share it. During high school and college, I worked at Dunkin' Donuts for about 7 years and bounced around to a few different locations. I was used to working at the Dunkin' in my town, where we would get the yeast rings delivered periodically and frost them ourselves as needed. I transferred to a new shop about a half hour from my house with all the same responsibilities except for the donuts. They were delivered by corporate, and they arrived frosted almost perfectly. They looked like the plastic donuts that they show in commercials, always round and not squished together, and they would dip them in frosting so it was evenly spread and neat. It was a busy Saturday morning and it was close to Valentine's Day, so we had a fresh order of brownie batter donuts delivered that morning. We were slammed, which was normal for a weekend, so it wasn't out of the ordinary to see my manager, who I'll call Jeremy, running around stressed out. When he first ran past me, I didn't think anything of it, and I continued making sandwiches at the sandwich station. He rushed by carrying a pastry tray, and I watched him begin frantically throwing something in the trash, looking really worried. At first I laughed and just said, "Jeremy, what the heck are you doing?" He strained out and he looked anything like himself. I had never seen Jeremy look so lost, so I asked what was going on and if something was wrong. "Someone filled the brownie batter donuts with staples," he said. He told me he got a phone call from corporate, and that one of the stores in our chain, which contained 10, had somehow discovered multiple staples in every donut in their order. That was at least 48 donuts for our store, and more or less for the other 9, depending on their sales. They told Jeremy we had to get rid of the most recent delivery, because whoever put the batter in the filler dumped a ton of staples in it as well. Thankfully we hadn't sold all the previous orders yet from that morning, because it was still relatively early. But the more I thought about it, the more I felt like I was going to be sick. What if a young child had gotten one of them? I pictured some family sitting at home on a Saturday morning, going out to get some drinks and donuts for the kids, and imagining everything else that could have happened after. I'm assuming nothing happened because I thankfully never heard anything on the news. Makes me wonder if they covered it up, and I hope they were able to find out the asshole who did it. It was a few months after I started high school, and I was trying to keep in contact with my friends from middle school. Especially my one friend that we'll call Karina. I've never talked to Karina over the phone, but I've always texted her. I stupidly didn't save her number, but she was the only one that texted me at that time. I remember her number ended with 77. So one night, my family is in the process of moving home so I could be closer to school. I get a text from Karina asking how I was doing. I carried on with normal conversation for a very long time. I didn't think much of it since the number had 77 at the end. One thing that threw me off was that she was asking me to call her all the time. It was weird, but I never called her because I'm terrible over the phone. One day I was at my mom's office, bored out of my mind while I'm texting Karina. She asked me to call her for the millionth time. I finally caved in and decided to call her because I had nothing else better to do. This is where things get very weird. I call her and a guy answers the phone. Thinking it might have been her older brother, I asked if Karina is there. He then asks, "Who's Karina?" Totally weirded out, I say, "Oops, wrong number," and hang up. Not even a nanosecond later, I get a text saying, "No, you have the right number." A few seconds go by and I get more texts, and I didn't answer the rest of the day. A few days later, I get a friend request from a guy that I don't know on Facebook, who we'll call Adam. I look to see if we have any mutual friends, and we have one in common. My friend that we'll call Rigo, and they went to the same school. I just got into high school, and I wanted to make friends, so I accepted him. Again, not nanoseconds later, I get a message from him asking why I ignore him. I told him that I didn't even know it was him, and that I thought I had been texting my friend Karina the whole time, since both their numbers had a 77 at the end. He blows it off and he starts texting and messaging me off the hook. He starts telling me really weird shit like, "You're beautiful and I love you so much," even though we don't even really know each other. I remember changing my profile picture, and again, he didn't waste time to tell me how adorable I am. Things got progressively more uncomfortable towards Valentine's Day. He kept asking if I wanted anything, and I kept telling him no. I guess he's not getting the message, and kept saying things like, "You look sexy in this," followed by pictures of thongs and lingerie. When Valentine's Day finally came around, he said that I was his true love. I finally told him that I wasn't interested in him, and that he needed to calm down with the pervy stuff. He was hurt, but it stopped, but not for long. He then started texting me morning, noon, and night, and I would ignore him all the time, but he still wasn't getting the message that I didn't like him. Come April, me, my friend Kelly, Rigo, and some of his friends from school decided to go see a movie together. I thought I was going to have fun. Well, I'm the first one to the movie theater at the mall, and my brother and dad decide to wait with me for my friends. I'm on the first floor, and I can see the elevator going up to the movie theater in plain sight. I turn around and look up, and there's Adam going up to the theater, and he makes eye contact with me. He totally knew I would be here, and I never told him once about my plans. I became ultra paranoid, and I told my brother to come with me into Hot Topic, just so I can be out of view from him. We look around for a bit, and I see Adam listening to music in the store. This guy will not quit. So me and my brother leave the store, and I tell my dad. He says we should wait out in the car until my friends arrived. When we're in the car, I text Rigo and I angrily tell him that Adam is here. At this point, Rigo knew how much I didn't like him, and he didn't like him either. I asked why he was there, and he says, "I might have said something about our plans, but I can assure you I didn't invite him." So Rigo, Kelly, and Rigo's friend arrive at the same time, and I couldn't be more relieved. I walk into the mall with them, and I ignore Adam for the whole movie. Afterwards, he whines about how no one wanted to talk to him the whole time, and I said he shouldn't have come then. Rigo laughed. The next day, I get a text from Adam, whining about how it was really rude of me to ignore him, and I just go off on him. I said, "You were the one who wasn't invited and decided to come anyway. How do you think it makes me feel when I tell you countless times you make me uncomfortable, and all of a sudden you just show up?" He then starts blaming me for some bullshit that I don't remember. I blocked him, deleted his number, and anything I could do to make sure he wasn't able to have any contact with me. Fast forward, that summer after freshman year, I'm on vacation and I get a friend request from Adam. I freaked out because I thought I deleted him, but it occurred to me that he might have made a different account, so I blocked that one too. Sophomore year, I got with my now boyfriend, Leon. We were talking about weird stuff that happened to us, and I told him about this. Leon asks, "How did he get your number anyway?" That question made my skin crawl, because it never occurred to me to ask Rigo if he handed it out, and I really don't think he would do that anyway. So the question still remains, how did Adam, a guy I never met, get my number? Before this story, just some quick notes. Keep in mind, this story happened over the span of only a month and a half, and everything happened quite quickly. For context, my name will be Kat, and his name will be John, and his mom is Karen. This is a story I've only ever told a handful of people, and I'll try to be as clear and accurate as I can, as this happened just over a year ago, but obviously I can't remember everything perfectly. And I know I made mistakes, and I'll probably mention it a few times, but honestly, I've criticized my own decisions a million times over, and it's just not useful to think about what I could have done differently at this point, so please just be respectful. Okay, so here's the story. About a year ago, I had just gone through a bad breakup. He dumped me over text on Valentine's Day. And after having been together for quite a while, this was quite a shock. I was absolutely devastated and I felt pretty bad about myself. It only took about 2 weeks before I was looking for another boyfriend, more or less a rebound guy. That's when I met John. We met on Tinder and instantly hit it off. I was in my first year of university studying biology, and he was in his first year at a different university studying history. He was smart and friendly and had a lot of common interests. He was giving me some weird vibes at first, but maybe it was that he seemed a bit desperate. But honestly, I was too after my bad breakup, so I didn't think much of it. After only a few days of talking, he asked me to go on a date with him to a play. I was actually really excited because that sounded like such an interesting date idea, and I thought it was pretty romantic. So we go on the date and it goes well. He rides the subway back a few stops with me, and I tell him about my ex. He begins telling me that he can't believe anyone would let a pretty girl like me go, and that he would do anything to make sure he got to keep me if we were dating. Looking back, you can see how creepy that statement is, but I was maybe naive or just happy that someone agreed that my ex was an asshole, and I took it as a compliment and saw nothing wrong with it. We keep messaging and going on occasional dates after this, and all was well. After just a few dates, John had told me he had really bad depression and anxiety. Now, it's important for me to mention that I also have some pretty extreme depression and mental health problems, and my breakup had kind of launched me into a downward spiral, so it was almost a relief to hear him say that because I felt like he wouldn't judge me for having depression too. And after that, we could confide in each other about our depression and help each other get out of bad mental states. After this revelation, we got really close really fast. We had only dated for a month, but we already had an intense relationship. I even thought that I loved him. Now, another problem with him though was his mother, Karen. She was very possessive of him, and maybe it's because of his depression, but he couldn't do anything without telling his mother first. One night he fell asleep at my place and forgot to set an alarm, and when he woke up, he had 10 missed calls and at least 50 text messages from his mom trying to find him. She had apparently called every hospital looking for him. She knew he was going to spend the night. She was just concerned because he slept 2 hours later than he said he would. She would do other things to manipulate him, like verbally abuse him or tell him he's a bad son if he doesn't do everything she wants. And she sets limits to how often and when he could come to my place. And I wasn't happy with this, obviously. I told him I thought it was ridiculous that she treated him like a child and that he's an adult and can go on dates whenever he wants. If she wants to know where he is, that's fine, but he shouldn't have to ask permission. We had a small argument about this, but he obviously is a mama's boy, so I dropped it. I still hadn't met his mom at this point as well, so who was I to judge? Another thing I'll mention is that one time he asked me to do a role play with him, in which I wear his glasses and call him specifically Sweetie. He was very clear that he wanted me to call him that. He told me he was a teacher fetish. I told him I wasn't into that kind of thing at all, and that I'm sorry. He asked a few times after that, and never really dropped it, but I always said no. This is important later. After one particularly bad night, he came over to console me, and I told him I was feeling pretty depressed. In his response, he asked me to marry him. This was only after just 1 month of dating. I laughed, thinking he was joking, but he didn't laugh. He just stared at me in the eyes. There was an awkward silence, and I said, "What?" And he said, "I'm serious. I love you. I want to spend my life with you." I laughed at him, and I gave him a firm no. He looked disappointed, but dropped it. I was concerned about this and confided in my friend, and she said if it were her, she'd dump him. I thought it was quite strange, but I really relied on the emotional support he gave me, and he was very emotionally fragile at the time, so I decided I'd just pretend it didn't happen. I'd like to mention I know I made mistakes and ignored red flags, but when I was with him, he often implied or even stated that I was too mentally unwell or unattractive to ever get anyone better than him. and said other manipulative things that made me feel like breaking up with him would be really bad for me. A few days later, I went to his place for the first time. He lived with his parents, so when his mom got home from work, I of course introduced myself. She seemed very skeptical of me and wouldn't shake my hand. She gave me a fake smile and said, "Hi," then started focusing all her attention on John. "Hi, sweetie," she said, giving him a big kiss. On the lips. Yeah, she also wore very similar glasses to him and continued to call him sweetie all night. That was basically the only thing she called him. Sound familiar to anything else that I mentioned? Yeah, I was very much creeped out, but I kept my mouth shut. His mom never spoke to me, only ever talking to me if it was necessary, and I got a very weird vibe from her. I had only gone to her house and met her willingly one time more after this, and it went basically the same, except this time, I was doing homework, and she kept making comments about how I was stupid, because I couldn't do my homework on my own. I tried to argue with her, and got called a bitch, but John shut us both down, and we all moved on. His dad also lived there, but mostly said nothing, and lurked around in the background, not saying much or staying in the basement, so he's not really important to the story, just an interesting detail. Fast forward a few days, I was still talking to John, but I think he sensed I was growing distant from him. We had been together about a month and a half at this point. I get a text from John very late at night, telling me he was upset and needed me, but I had a midterm the next day, and I told him I'm sorry I can't be there. I needed to sleep and be at school in the morning for my midterm. He was very upset, so I suggested that he go to the hospital and told him I could meet him there after my midterm. He didn't respond. After a half hour, I got another text from him. He tells me he's outside my residence building and his mom drove him. I told him again, I couldn't go to his place. He says that it's okay and that he just wanted to talk. I give in and go outside to meet him and go for a walk. He starts walking me in the direction of the parking lot, and I get a really bad feeling in my stomach. I don't know why, but I just felt scared. I said, "Why don't we walk this way?" And I try to turn and go the other direction, and he says, "No, it's fine," and grabs my arm tightly. I don't know what else to do, so I say, "John, you're making me really uncomfortable. Why are you taking me to the parking lot?" I tend to be very concise when I'm stressed out. He said nothing and kept walking me in silence. I tried to pull my arm away, but he has a tight grip. "John," I said loudly. He says, "It's okay." "Let me go home now," I say, firmly pulling my arm. No one else was around to help me, and I was terrified. "I don't think you want to do that," he says, emotionless. "What? Yes, I do." I'm about to cry at this point. I was so confused and scared, and he starts explaining. "Listen, Kat, my mom is in the driveway, and if you don't get in the car soon, she's going to call the police and tell them that you're depressed, and that you've threatened things. The police will come here and cause a scene, then hold you against your will." My brain started going a million miles a minute. I lived in a university residence and really didn't want the police to pick me up where everyone could see me and cause a scene. I also had been to the hospital before, and my school had warned me of possible repercussions if I tried to do such things on campus again, which he reminded me of. I was really confused and I felt betrayed. However, quickly weighing the pros and cons in my head, I thought supporting my boyfriend when he needs me and not causing a scene would be the easiest thing to do. Still not realizing what he was trying to do, I tell him I'm not happy about that he's blackmailing me, and I don't want to be with him for much longer if he's going to treat me this way. But the threats continue, so I go to his car. I get there and there's his evil mother, Karen, with the most disgusting, ugly smirk on her face. "I was just about to call the police," she says. John stands beside me as I get in the back of the car, and he gets in the front, and she starts to drive. As the shock wore off, I realized that I was pissed. I start yelling that they're manipulating me, and I go off on Karen for manipulating her son and being a bad mother, and yelling at him for being a bad boyfriend. Meanwhile, Karen is screaming at me, telling me that I'm a slut and a bad girlfriend, and that I should leave Earth because I'm such a bad influence for John. And we have one of the most intense arguments I've ever had with anyone. I truly hate confrontation, and I honestly didn't know I was capable of so much rage, but fear and adrenaline does crazy things to people. Karen then pulls over the car and says, "Get out." I lunge at the door, ready to run away. "But I will call the police on you," she says. I hesitate. Who will they believe? A reliable older lady with a respectable job, or a slutty little autistic, I'm not autistic, Hood rat like you. Especially with your history of mental health. And then she laughs. The situation dawned on me. I couldn't leave. While I hesitated to think, hand still on the door handle, she escalated her threats to tell the police that I assaulted her and her son after he tried to break up with me. She said, "In my car, you don't get to talk to me like that. So either be civil and quiet or get the hell out." John stayed quiet throughout this whole car ride, not defending himself or his mother, or not even helping me, just stone cold and expressionless. I started crying and begging her to please let me go, to which she said, "You have every right to leave." But I felt like I had no option, so I swallowed my pride, apologized to Karen, and I let myself get driven to their house. I tried texting my friend what was going on, but she wasn't answering. Once we get there, it's like 1 or 2 in the morning. I wasn't sure because of course my phone had died. Great timing. Karen had been taunting me and making fun of me the whole way home, and I wasn't even able to defend myself after her new threats. I was still crying and John helped me out of the car. He held on to me as I went inside. I don't know if it was because he wanted to get me in quickly or because I could barely move, I was crying so hard. But they kept shushing me and Karen raised her hand as if to slap me if I didn't shut up, in her words. So I held my tears until we got inside. Once we finally get inside, John brings me straight into his room. He asks if I want to watch a movie, but I just lay down on his bed and sobbed. He sits beside me and touches my arm in what would have been a comforting way under different circumstances. I pull away and he just quietly watches videos and occasionally tells me that this was for the best. And how I couldn't hurt myself as long as he was protecting me, and now we could both be safe together. His dad was home, but the whole time everything was happening, he said nothing to me and only came into John's room one time to give me a strange look and then leave. Really weird guy. John's mom came in a while later and told me to sit up and stop crying, saying that this was the best for me and John, and that she's only doing this because she cares about us. I don't have anything to say to her, so I just pet their dog. And I don't make eye contact. She berates me and insults me and makes fun of me with no reaction other than a few snide comments from me that John would tell me were uncalled for, and more tears and silence. And then she started going after me for petting the dog. Why won't you make eye contact? What are you, autistic? Then proceeds to call me an idiot and other slurs, and all of this is even more disgusting because of her respectable job, is that she works with disabled teenagers. I ignore her, and then she starts saying really hurtful things. Now I can take an insult, but she crossed the line when she started talking about how my mother was abusive and how I deserved it, and she can see why I was abused. Now my mother may have been abusive, but that crossed the line. She had no right to talk about that, and John had no right to tell her. She then went on to say that she was a much better mother and I should be grateful that she's doing this for me. The whole time I was there, she kept implying that this was in some sick way supposed to help me. I feel like I was only there for John to have someone with him though. I lost it at the comments about my mom though, and I start yelling at her about how she's the abusive one and worse than my mother, and that I hate her, and we have a screaming match for a while. And again, John doesn't defend me and only says that I should listen to his mom. After more insults and yelling, she storms off, and it's just me and John, and I tell him I'm breaking up with him and that I want to leave, now. He goes to get his mom, who says I'm just having a rough night and don't mean it, and that we should both just sleep. They give me pajamas to wear, and I get dressed in his closet and go to bed, and he was sleeping beside me. I wasn't afraid John was going to hurt me, and don't worry, he didn't. Not physically, at least. He was more self-destructive than violent ever. But I was still uncomfortable sleeping beside him because I felt betrayed and scared, and even violated to a certain point. I wanted to leave more than anything. I felt like an animal in a cage, and then I got up and bolted to the front door, only for him to run behind me and grab me and have Karen block my way. I started screaming, "Let me go. Please, I'm sorry, let me go." I was sobbing and I was trying to be as clear as I could through my tears. Karen looked at me like I was the most disgusting thing she had ever seen and scoffed at me. "Grow up," she said, and walked off. John brought me back to his room and locked his door. His mom came back and he let her in a few minutes later, and she had some kind of pill to help me sleep, she said, but I refused to take it. She kept insisting and I kept saying no. "I'm not trying to poison you," she kept shouting, but I didn't trust that bitch at all. John took one first to prove they were safe, and it was clear after over an hour of arguing, and John taking one, that I wasn't going to have a choice. I pretended to take one at first, but this bitch checked my mouth and made sure I actually took it. Basically shoved one in my mouth after she realized I didn't take the other one. After a while, I felt very tired and I fell asleep. I still don't know what she gave me, but it tasted awful, and it was the kind to dissolve under my tongue. She had them in a clear plastic baggie with no label. I woke up the next morning and John and his mom were both in the kitchen eating breakfast. I saw my chance. I was alone. I got dressed hella fast and found my phone where he had hidden it, still not charged. He had my fare card for public transport in the case though, so I pocketed my phone and quickly snuck to the door. Nothing had ever been so intense for me before. I put on my shoes really quickly and opened the door and ran. I ran like the wind, on the verge of tears and shaking. I had never ran so fast. I didn't know the neighborhood that well, and I didn't know how to get home, but I just needed to get away. I have no idea if they chased me or not, or if they even noticed right away. The dog stayed quiet. I eventually found a bus stop and I got on the first bus to show up. I pull out my card, tap it, and of course, it didn't have any money on it. My brain just buzzed. I had no way to get home. I needed to be on this bus, and I had to get away. The bus driver shrugged and said you should have money. Meanwhile, I was still staring at my card. Then I just started crying. I practically fell over that I was crying so hard. I tried to explain what was happening, but I was crying so hard and talking so fast that I made no sense. And the bus driver said, "Whoa, are you okay?" And I screamed, "No." I started crying harder. He just quietly handed me a transfer and I thanked him and sat down really quickly, noticing everyone staring at me. I put my hood up and cried quietly. I still didn't know how to get home, but I realized the bus was going to a subway station, and even though it was a long ride, I could get home from the station. As soon as we got there, I ran onto the subway, still crying and shaking. I probably looked like quite the sight. The subway eventually got to my school, then I realized I couldn't go home, because John knew where I lived. And God, he would have called the police, I knew it. I didn't know what to do. I saw someone with a phone charger and ran over and asked if I could please charge my phone, that it was an emergency. Typical millennial me didn't know my friend's phone number. I charged my phone, face covered in tears, and probably smudged mascara, and immediately texted my friend. I had told her right before my phone died that John and Karen wouldn't let me leave their car, and she had sent quite a few messages, and had apparently tried to come to my house to look for me. I told her where I was and asked if I could go to her place. She lived somewhere else on campus. I got many messages from John as well. He just said that he needed me and that I needed him, and that I'm making a huge mistake. Absolutely anything and everything to try to make me respond. Now, you guys will probably judge me for this, but I went to visit him in the hospital. I don't know why after all that I decided to do this, but I did. After I got to the ER, nurses took me aside and asked me if I was depressive, and of course I said no. I was legally an adult, so they couldn't take Karen's word over mine and didn't hospitalize me. I told John we were over and I hope he gets better soon, but he was mad at me. He said his mom told him how I was depressed and how she said that she heard the nurses talking to each other about how I was lying to get attention and all this other bullshit. I tried to defend myself to him, but I just left defeated and gave Karen the middle finger and literally ran the hell out and never looked back. I crashed at my friend's place that night and I slept on her floor for a week. A while later, I got a text from one of John's friends, basically insinuating he was extremely depressed and that it was my fault. And I told the guy that after what that family did to me, they can all go to hell and to never message me again, and I blocked the number. I have no idea if John is alive or not to this day, but I did get some revenge in the end. A story for another day. As you might have noticed, I didn't call the police. I did speak to a police officer about it eventually, and the concerns were about how Karen would be more reliable than me. I didn't have much evidence, but they said if I want, I could file a report, but honestly I never did. I wanted nothing to do with them. To those who want to say I wasn't actually kidnapped because I wasn't tied up or anything, which someone has said to me before, I may have been allowed to leave physically, but emotionally they made me feel like I didn't have a choice to stay, and they did drug me, so I don't know, man. When I was 16 years old, I decided to surprise my parents with a bouquet of flowers for Valentine's Day. We've always celebrated this as a family holiday rather than a romantic one. I didn't have a car to drive to a florist, but my high school was within walking distance of a hospital boasting a gift shop that sells floral arrangements. Between classes during the week on Valentine's Day, I set off for the hospital by my lonesome, cutting across campus to walk through a network of side roads populated with specialty doctors' offices that keep odd hours. The sort of buildings where traveling doctors mainly hold surgery consultations or perform small procedures a few times a month. The trip there passed without incident. As I was walking back, though, I noticed an unkempt 1990s car close behind me. While my memory of the car is hazy, I am left with the impression that there were at least two men with whose faces I could not see. Initially, I assumed that the driver was simply afraid of hitting me, the reason they weren't passing by. So I made a point of dramatically walking further into the grassy shoulder of the road, demonstrating to them that they could safely drive ahead. But they still refused to pass me by, continuing to creep along behind at a slow pace. Beginning now to suspect that the driver was more interested in me than a destination, I began to walk faster. The car confirmed my suspicions by matching my speed. Despite the impracticality of my shoes and the threat of spilling water from my vase, I commenced to run as fast as I possibly could. That was when they hit the gas and again matched my speed. I realized at this point that the car was 100% following me, and that there was no one in sight to notice, and I needed to get away. I bolted into the first parking lot that I saw, and the car turned in after me. Despite there being only 2 or 3 cars in the spacious front parking lot, and there being no other sign of activity at the office, this car did not stop to park in the numerous spaces available there. The driver instead opted to pursue me into the partially under construction back portion of this lot, behind the office. It passed every available parking space to corner me against a pile of debris and rubble from the construction, coming to a diagonal stop less than 3 feet away. Before anyone could emerge from the vehicle, I somehow managed to scale the small prominence of rubble against my back, vase in hand, and jumped from its peak to land painfully on the other side, which fortunately was a plot of undeveloped land within sight of my high school campus. I took a quick peek back over my shoulder to see if they were still in pursuit, but the car had sped off after I reached the top of the rubble pile and was now nowhere in sight. They had not parked in the lot at all. They had no business there. The driver was 100% following me. I sprinted at top speed and didn't stop until I was soaked with sweat in the dead of winter and panting in the student lounge among my classmates, who didn't seem to give a damn when I told them. Possibly because our hometown is supposedly a human trafficking capital and the crime rate is outrageous. Although I'm convinced that this was something more informal than human trafficking, as a dilapidated car suggested poverty. And I have read human trafficking usually arises through grooming and not being snatched off the streets. In retrospect, I should have told an adult, or alerted campus security at the least, and called the non-emergency line of the local police station, but I was young, foolish, insecure, and afraid of getting in trouble for leaving campus when I didn't have a signed permission slip permitting me to do so. I kept trying to convince myself that I had misread the situation or was overreacting. I don't know what I would have even told police had I called them, as I was entirely ignorant on the subject of cars and couldn't have identified the make of it had I been asked. And I couldn't see the faces of the occupants. I was also just worried that my parents would restrict my already extremely limited freedoms if they knew I had been in danger. I feel horrible having never told anyone and truly hope that my secrecy hasn't led to someone being hurt or killed. I believe the only missing people, aside from runaway children or elderly adults with dementia in this city right now, are men, aside from one woman a few decades ago. It was Valentine's Day, and me and my girlfriend are college students at a small school in Kentucky. Due to the way that the college works, it's hard for a lot of students to afford to keep up with having their cars on campus. This means you typically have to walk everywhere unless you have a bike, and I was among the unlucky this semester. The evening had rolled around and we were thinking of semi-romantic things that we could do together, and we arrived upon ordering food off of Uber Eats. Not the most glamorous, but I offered to pay. Most of the restaurants were closed, but Taco Bell was open, so naturally we ordered from there. Unbeknownst to us though, there were no active drivers at the time, probably due to the road conditions because it was freezing and snowy. So the app defaulted to the setting where you can just walk and pick it up. There wasn't an option to cancel it, so I decided I would walk the 1.5 miles to pick up the food. I know most people at this point wouldn't be keen on walking in the snowy freezing conditions at that time of night, but I'm a broke college student who just spent his last few spare dollars on food. So with a hug and a kiss from my girlfriend, I started off on my journey to get the food. Walking through campus at night isn't a problem for me since I'm a 5'9" male, but when you make it through campus and into the residential areas of the town, that's when things tend to get sketchier. I had made it through the campus and I was about a quarter of the way to my destination when in the distance I saw another man walking down the street. Initially, two things put me at unease. The first one being that he was wearing one of those long trench coat things that you typically associate with sketchy men, and the other being the conditions out. I mean, logically, no one should be walking around in these conditions, as they were literally cold enough to freeze the sweat in your hair. I pushed these thoughts back, assuming he was either in a similar situation as me, or he just really enjoyed the cold weather. I did switch sides of the street though, as I'm a tad socially awkward and I hate talking to random people I don't really know. We both continue our walks and pass one another, and it seemingly goes off without a hitch. Neither of us acknowledged the other and we just kept walking. Being the wary person I was, I looked over my shoulder, often in these kinds of situations. He was walking the same direction he had been, which is good. I kept walking and still throwing the occasional glance over my shoulder for safety. About 2 minutes after me and the mystery man had passed, I cast a glance over my shoulder, and I noticed the man was now walking in my direction, and a bit faster than I was walking. This creeped me out, and I started to walk even faster. I couldn't flat out run because it was too icy. At this moment, I noticed the man picked up speed too, until we were side by side on opposite sides of the street. When he caught up to me, he started yelling at me, and I saw something fall from the sleeve of his jacket, almost like he was concealing it, only it fell to the ground, making a loud clatter, like a piece of metal bar or a large metal knife. At this moment, I grasped the danger of the situation, and my fight or flight instincts kicked in. Ready to defend myself, I pulled out my pocket knife as I noticed him starting to make his way across the street. It was at this moment that I said something to the effect of, "Hey man, I don't want any trouble. I've got a knife on me." At this time, the man stopped in his tracks and said, "Oh, I thought you were someone else who just attacked me." I played it off cool with a small gesture, and I thought I was safe. I continued on my trek to Taco Bell, and after this experience, I was all the more wary. As I was looking over my shoulder, I noticed the man from before on the same path that I was on. I just walked as fast as I could to the Taco Bell, while throwing glances over my shoulder. Except at some point, the man just mysteriously vanished. Made it back to college campus without any more events, but I had a hand on my pocket knife at all times. To this day, I have no clue what this man's intentions were, but they didn't seem good. To begin, this started when I was 14, female, now 21. I just transferred to a new high school in the middle of the school year as a freshman with my twin sister. I was enrolled in a Spanish 2 class where I met Tony, and that was where the obsession began. But when I started my class and met Tony, I initially thought he was attractive. He was tall, had brown hair, and beautiful eyes for a guy. But I did notice he was extremely shy and kind of awkward. But I made up excuses to talk to him, asking him about the homework and other meaningless small talk. He took to me and asked if I wanted to walk around during lunch and talk, so I happily agreed. He was very obviously not confident, and he didn't know how to initiate conversation, so a lot of the time I did most of the talking. He even went as far as asking him for his phone number. After a few days of texting and talking, I can tell he doesn't have any friends and he is kinda negative, and he has a pessimistic view towards life. It was rather draining and disappointing. Things he would say were kind of unsettling, or I guess just unusual for me. He would text me fantasizing about being a superhero, kind of like roleplay, in which I was the damsel in distress and he was always my savior. He had an obsession with the killer from the Scream movies. Overall, he was a nice guy, but different from what I was expecting or attracted to. Time passes, and Valentine's Day is coming up, and we are talking practically every day, so he asked me to be his Valentine. I agree somewhat reluctantly. So it's Valentine's Day. He walks up to me and gives me a pack of Hershey's Kisses and some Twizzlers. I don't like Twizzlers, so I handed them back to him, gave him a kiss on the cheek, and went to my class. Yes, I know that was kind of a bitch move, but I was honestly losing interest in him at that point. And I told him before I didn't like candy like that. During the day, I received more gifts, flowers, and candy from other friends. And I see Tony, and I can tell he's extremely upset by this, but he doesn't say anything. He texts me later in the day saying how stupid he felt, and how he was outdone by everybody else. I didn't respond. Over the next few weeks, I gradually talk to him less and less. In class is awkward, and I can tell he wants to say something to me, but never does. I later learned from my twin sister that he asks her every single day about me, and if I'm talking to someone else, even if I like him, and how to win me over, confiding in her that he has never even talked to a girl before. And at first I think it's sweet, but I still no longer had a romantic interest in him. We would talk at school sometimes, and he would bring me homemade cookies and walk me to the train station. Still text and try to call me in the evenings after school. But now I was talking to someone new who eventually became my boyfriend for the rest of high school, Brandon. When I started dating Brandon, I knew that Tony was absolutely devastated. He then started telling people around school that was his first kiss. I was confused because I didn't know a kiss on the cheek counted as that, but to each their own. It was somewhat upsetting because people were getting the impression that we dated or that I played him, which was not the case at all. I would still talk to Tony as a friend. He was in the same grade and classes as my new boyfriend, and he would always tell me how he thought Brandon didn't like him and that he felt like Brandon knew about us. I told Tony there was nothing to know about us because we weren't anything but friends. And Brandon was totally chill, non-confrontational, stoner type. Not in his nature to stir up drama over nothing. And definitely not the jealous type. The school year was coming to an end, and Tony comes running up to me the last day of school and hands me this, I shit you not, 60 to 70 page notebook, wide ruled if it makes a difference, explaining all the ways he's in love with me and how everybody at the school thinks poorly of me, and how he can treat me better. I read it once, and I show my twin, and she tells me how weird and uncomfortable it makes her, and we both agreed on that. I stash it away and I don't speak of it to anyone else. I act like nothing happened, and I still talk to him as a friend occasionally. I worked a lot in high school in my free time, and I spent a lot of time with my boyfriend and friends, and I didn't think much about Tony. Time goes on and we eventually stop talking completely. I see him around school and he never really is with anyone else. He was always alone. Which I didn't really find strange anymore considering how awkward and quiet he can be. Fast forward another year, I'm a junior. Tony and Brandon are both seniors, getting ready to graduate. Tony texts me out of the blue one day and tells me he has written a book and it would mean the world to him if I could be the first to read it and give him feedback. And being the person that I am, I agree. So he meets up with me at school the next day and hands me this thick notebook and tells me to take my time reading it and to give him honest feedback when I was finished. I read this story in 4 class periods. It was around 300 pages long. Anyways, the story takes place in a Game of Thrones setting. The 3 main characters are Eric, which is Tony, Elva, me, and Isaac, Brandon. For the sake of confusion, I'll be referring to the characters by our real names. The only reason I know the characters were us and not fictional was simply by the way he had described them, literally identical to our physical appearances. In the story, Tony was the son of the king or whatever, and the rest of us were mere peasants. But Tony was always in love with me, but I was with Brandon. It was the annual time where our kingdom would go to battle with another for honor and glory, gladiator style. Tony thought it would be a wonderful time to prove himself and volunteered. The night before our kingdom traveled to where the battle would take place, my character went to Tony in the middle of the night to express her love and fear, and they ended up having very graphic sex. It was truly disturbing to read. The next day after they arrived at the place of battle, my character went to his room again where the same graphic encounter occurred again, and during which Brandon came looking for my character and which we were caught. My character told Tony I didn't really love him and ran after Brandon to apologize for being a harlot. Tony was absolutely devastated and ultimately let his opponent kill him in battle because he couldn't handle the loss of the love of his life. Our kingdom goes back home, and in the middle of the night, Brandon sneaks through the window and murders me. He slit my throat. In the end. As you can imagine, I was absolutely horrified and creeped out. I threw the book away and never told Tony what I thought about it, but he must have known because he never asked for it back. Tony and Brandon both graduate and life goes on. Tony didn't try to reach out to me for a few years until I was around 20. He messaged me on Instagram in the middle of the night. "Show me your feet. Submit to daddy. I always looked at your feet at school and would fantasize about them, along with links to a few foot fetish websites." I promptly blocked him. The next day, he messaged me on another account, which was a foot fetish and bondage account that he ran. He asked me why I blocked him, but I just blocked him again. Earlier last year on my new account, he messaged me basically calling me a whore and how he wishes I would die, and how he hated everyone we went to school with and hoped they would all die, and how he fantasized on how he would kill me for all the pain I caused him. I was genuinely afraid, but I didn't know how to handle the situation. Was it really a death threat? I don't know. I later learned that he worked at a diner down the street from my apartment, and I avoided it at all costs. I've since moved, and I haven't heard from Tony since, but multiple girls I went to high school told me he was obsessed with me, and would constantly talk about me to them, and how he would message them the same disgusting things while he was on a drunken binge. I live in a small town in the Midwest. It's super safe. The crime rate is pretty low and consists of mostly domestic disputes and traffic violations. There's only about 20,000 people in the town, and it seems like I see someone I know or at least recognize out in public every day. Back in 2008, I was about to turn 19, and I wanted to have a real party for my birthday. I graduated from a private Christian high school the year before, and I hadn't ever partied before, even during my first year at a state university. I just wasn't ever interested because my friends weren't either. I was just a small town girl at a big university who didn't really get noticed much, other than guys on my boyfriend's dorm floor asking what I was doing with him. They were all hitting on me, but I loved my boyfriend. That year I decided it was going to be different. I had dropped out of college, which is kind of stupid, I know, and I broke up with my boyfriend. I had a few new friends who did party, and they seemed to always be talking about how much fun it was to go to house parties. I wanted my 19th birthday to be the first time I got drunk, so I had my older friends help me buy alcohol and invite all of our close friends over to my house. The night came and went. Fun was had, and my friends commented on how great my house was for parties. I lived alone in a 3-bedroom house with an attached garage, so people who wanted to stay over could stay in one of the bedrooms, and people who wanted to smoke had easy access to the garage. We sometimes moved my car out of the garage and played beer pong too. My friends really pushed the idea of having more parties, and I loved the thought of meeting new people, so we started partying at my house every weekend. It wasn't hard to get people to come to the parties. It was August, and there were 3 colleges around our town. More than once, my house was full of people I didn't know at all. I woke up a lot with random strangers at my house, but one of my friends always took responsibility for inviting each stranger over. It was no big deal to me. I would just clean up the house and go to work during the week and have another party on the weekend. These parties weren't super crazy or anything. There weren't really drugs involved, mostly just alcohol, which I thought was totally safe. One day in September when I was leaving for work, I went to shut the garage door and I noticed that the door remote wasn't on the car sun visor where I usually kept it. I thought maybe it had fallen off, so I got out and searched under the seats. I was more annoyed than scared, because I thought I had maybe taken it out while I was drunk or something to close the garage door, instead of using the remote attached to the wall by the entrance to the house. I shut the garage door with the wall remote and I went through the house to get back into my car and go to work. That night at work, I clocked out for lunch, and as soon as I entered the parking lot, my phone rang. It was a blocked number. The caller ID just said, "unavailable." I thought it was one of my friends calling me as a prank, because that's something that we did a lot in high school. So I answered, expecting someone to ask me something stupid in a weird accent, but there was nothing, and I mean complete silence. I thought it was weird, but I hung up. I didn't want to waste my lunch break dealing with stupid pranks. Everything continued on normal as I worked the rest of my shift. We closed the store and I was walking to my car when I get another call. It was from unavailable again. The same silence rang through the phone when I answered. Absolutely nothing could be heard on the other line. I really thought it was one of my friends then, because I hadn't had any missed calls, and how would this person be calling me as soon as I clocked out and had my phone on me? My friends knew my schedule, so that was the only explanation. I called my friend Lacey, and she said that she had no idea what I was talking about. I didn't believe her at first, but then her boyfriend verified that she had been with him and they did not call me. I wasn't sure what to think, but I brushed it off and forgot about it as soon as I got home. I had the next couple of days off, and usually on days off I slept in pretty late. I woke up around 11 the next day and got out of bed. I grabbed my phone and went into the living room. My phone rang, and you guessed it, it was unavailable calling. Again, I heard silence when I answered. This happened a couple of times throughout the day, and I was getting pretty annoyed by then. I was also annoyed that I still couldn't find my garage door remote. I looked everywhere that day, and I finally just gave up. I thought maybe it had fallen out of my car somewhere. Fast forward about 3 weeks. The calls started happening every single day. The most unsettling part of this is that they would only happen when I was available to answer the phone. I never had any missed calls during work or when I was asleep. As soon as I would step out of my workplace, unavailable would call. When I would wake up in the mornings, unavailable would call again. I really thought it was someone going to some great lengths to play a prank on me, but then even weirder stuff started happening. I stopped parking my car in the garage because it was so annoying to go through the house to open or close the garage door. One day when I left for work, I backed up and heard a loud scraping noise. I got out and there were huge tree branches underneath my car. I had no idea how they got there or when they got there, but it sure was annoying getting them out from under my car. About a week later, I heard a loud bang at the front door and went to check it out. There was a tree branch sitting on my porch, resting on my front door. This is when I called Lacey and basically told her that I had to stay at her house that night. I was terrified. I went to Lacey's and sure enough, unavailable called. By now, it had almost been a month since this began, and I was so frustrated that I stopped answering. So I didn't answer that call. And about 5 seconds later, Lacey's phone rang. It was from unavailable. We were super freaked out and I told her not to answer it. I knew then that it was either a mutual friend playing a crazy long prank or we had a real stalker on our hands. I decided to tell one of my managers at work what had been happening. He immediately told me to call the police the next time I get a call, and that if I didn't call, he would. I told him I would call the police as soon as I got off the phone with unavailable, when he or she called next time. Like clockwork, my phone rang as I walked to my car on break. I called the police after listening to unavailable silence for a full minute. The cops basically told me they couldn't trace the call, but that my phone company could. I got the runaround from my phone company, and despite this, the police wouldn't help. They did say that because this person had probably put branches in weird places, they could send a police officer to watch my house for a couple of days to see if they noticed anything. Nothing but phone calls happened for a week, and I wasn't really that scared anymore. I actually started being pretty mean to whoever it was, calling them a coward and asking why they were doing this. After following up with the police, it seemed like the police didn't really believe that someone was actually on my property at all. They apologized that I was scared but said there wasn't anything else they could do. Branches started showing up in the middle of my yard and I would hear banging noises on my front windows at night. For some reason I didn't feel safe anymore in my room, so I started sleeping on the couch. One night, in the middle of the night, I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water, and I get another call. I was so scared that I called Lacey and she came over. I didn't understand how this was happening because I couldn't see anyone watching me or anything. I never noticed anyone following me or watching me from afar. So what was happening to me? Sometimes there would be napkins inside my screen door, or just stacks of blank paper in my grass. I also got markers in my mailbox, and sometimes there would be candy wrappers on top of my car. Whoever was doing this was really strange. This went on until Christmas time. On Christmas Eve, I was driving out to my grandpa's farm to have Christmas with them, and I got a call. I was angry by now, and I thought that I could have a holiday in peace. I picked up the phone and started screaming at the person on the other end that it was Christmas, and they should just really let me celebrate with my family. I called them a freak and asked what they wanted. I was crying and asking them to just leave me alone, and as always, there was nothing but silence. That night, I was sleeping on the couch, and I woke up to lights in my face. Someone was shining several flashlights into my windows. I wasn't sure what to do, so I ran into the bathroom, locked the door and called Lacey. She drove over and we looked around and found no one. I was really scared, but she stayed over and that made me feel a little bit more safe. But the calls kept coming. and the police did nothing. Nothing else happened outside my house. No branches or weird things turning up. I started sleeping in my room again because I thought maybe they had backed off. One morning I woke up and went into my dining room and noticed through the kitchen door window that my garage door was open. I thought maybe it had gotten stuck on something when I put it down, so it had gone back up. It had a sensor, so no one would get stuck under the door, I guess. Without me noticing, I went to the kitchen door and shut it with the wall remote. I grabbed a glass of milk and went to sit down at the dining room table, and that's when I saw it. My missing garage door remote was sitting on my dining room table. Of course I freaked out. I was still in my pajamas, but I ran to my car and drove. I didn't even know where I was going. I just called Lacey and told her it was time to move. We had been talking about moving to a different city for a while now, and I told her it was time to go. Her and her boyfriend came over to check the house with me, but no one was there. Me and Lacey got an apartment in a different city, and the calls stopped as soon as we moved. I remember it was Valentine's Day, and we were having a girls' day out. I told her that I was just going to leave my phone at home so we could enjoy a movie. I think we saw He's Just Not That Into You. I asked her if I could leave it plugged into her charger that was in the kitchen, and she said yes. Before we left, she had to wait for me to plug it in, and we left through the kitchen door. So we went out and went to the movies. We were chatting about the movie on the way back to the car, and I saw something sitting beside my car on the ground. My stomach immediately sunk when I saw that it was my phone. We both died a little bit inside and stayed at her boyfriend's house that night, and there was no sign of anyone being in our apartment the next day when we got there. That was the last and weird, scary thing that happened to me. Unfortunately, I never got to find out who did any of this. No one has ever fessed up to it, and I know my friends wouldn't have let me live in a state of constant fear for nearly 5 months. I asked a couple of the random people I'd met at some of my house parties, but they had no idea what I was talking about. This happened when I was in high school, long ago. My mom just recently found the paperwork about it when she cleaned out her office upon retiring from the police department. I remember being upset and scared when it happened, but reading the details as an adult, it sounded even worse than I remembered. I was 17, female, working at a flower and gift shop. It's nighttime and a man comes in. Short, overweight, and balding, and in his 40s. Just plain creepy. He tells me about how he needs an apology gift for his girlfriend, so I offer a bouquet. Obviously, it's a flower shop. He says she doesn't like flowers because they die. This was the first weird thing, as he came into a flower shop. Then he goes into detail about how he hit her and asks me if I think he was right to do so. This was long ago, so I don't remember exactly what I said, but it was something along the lines of, not if you want her to continue being your girlfriend. He then tells me what a great job I'm doing and asks when I get off of work. But I dodge answering and he leaves. Nothing more from this guy for 6 months. Then right before Valentine's Day, he walks in the door 1 minute before closing. It was dark, and from the outside it looked like I was working alone, as my coworker, about 40 female, was in the bathroom. Instinctively, it felt like a predator had just entered the room. You know when something isn't right, and everything felt not right. I then notice he has a tarnished revolver tucked into the front of his windbreaker, which is halfway unzipped. It was obvious that he wanted it seen. I quickly scribbled a note to my coworker that said, "He has a gun," and I handed it to her when she came out of the bathroom. She calmly walked over to the phone and looked at me, wordlessly asking if she should call the cops. I shook my head no, as I felt like it would escalate the situation. God forbid he heard the police coming and took us hostage or something. I was just going to try and act as calm and normal as I could, and hopefully not tip the situation into something more dangerous. He spends about 15 minutes wandering around what was a fairly small shop. In retrospect, he was probably waiting to see if my coworker would leave, as it was now well past closing. Finally, he places an order for pickup on Valentine's Day, which gives me his name and the info for the police report that I'm sure as hell about to file. He buys a card and pulls out a wad of $100 bills, which he slowly thumbs through as looking for the right one to use for payment for his $40 order. I asked him if he wants a bag, as it wouldn't be very inconspicuous if he just showed up at home with the Valentine's card. He replies, "No, I don't feel like being inconspicuous tonight," which seemed like an obvious reference to the gun hanging out of his coat. He finally leaves, and we quickly lock the door and watch him sit in his truck outside. We were not about to exit the shop until he was gone. Finally, he pulls out of his parking spot and moves to another spot further away and continues to just sit there. I don't know how long we waited, but he finally left. I called my mom crying, and she called the police, who came to the shop the next day to take a report. I told my best friend at the time what happened, and she told her mother. Her mother happened to work with the man and informed security at her job. She said he was very weird, creepy, and liked to talk about weapons a lot. Security at his job. It's a large company with government contracts and things having to do with tech and security. Pulled him into the office and questioned him about it. He claimed it was a glove in his pocket, not a revolver. The police were pissed that his company made contact with him about it before they did, and he successfully dodged the cops' multiple calls and visits to his apartment. My mom, much to my teen fury at the time, made me quit my job, which was devastating as I loved it there, but in retrospect, it was totally the right call. I never saw him again. I am a female, and I was kind of a dweeb in middle school. I was the quiet girl, which is a label that kind of followed me all the way up through grade school, and eventually would stick through the former half of high school. I was picked on for it to some degree, but ultimately most people ignored me, which I decided was preferable to being hassled every class period. I was also not into very girly things and having a preference for video games and drawing, which kept my pool of like-minded friends pretty trimmed down. I was mostly too shy to approach any boys, whether that was in pursuit of friendship or whatever else. So I mostly stuck with a pair of chicks who, despite going their own ways and becoming homecoming queens in the following years, really enjoyed my awkward and quirky company at the time. I believe I was in 8th grade and Valentine's Day rolled around. Being an insufferable nerd, initially I didn't give it much thought. Our school did this silly thing in which you could, in the days before Valentine's Day, order carnations and have them delivered to other students, anonymously or otherwise. Needless to say, I wasn't expecting one at all. But in the first period that day, which happened to be gym for me, I was sitting down for roll call and the flower delivery person came in for their rounds. To my surprise, my name was called. I was so floored that at first I didn't speak up, assuming I heard the wrong name or something. But sure enough, after a few pointing fingers from the rest of my class, I was the confused but flattered recipient of a nice peach-colored carnation. I hadn't had the slightest clue the sender was, of course. By lunchtime, I was itching to see if one of my gossipy know-everything girlfriends had any leads. They too were surprised to see me sit down with my lunch sporting a carnation, though not in an insulting way, and they were very keen on getting to the bottom of it. They were thrilled to think there might be some shy boy with an interest in me. And after the initial shock, I was too. They did a bunch of asking around that lunch period, and by the end of lunch, they had a potential candidate. His name was Josh. I didn't know him very well, but I had a couple classes with him, namely art. I believe he was also in my math class. He too was a very quiet, lonesome, nerdy type, and I knew he was into video games. If only from the art project we were doing at the time. He made something with the Super Smash Bros. Theme, and I thought that was pretty cool. He had glasses, long curly blonde hair that he kept up in a ponytail, and he wore all black pretty regularly. Immediately, my mind wandered through the prospect of having him as a boyfriend, going home with him after school to play video games and draw, and whatever else two dorks would find interesting. My friends had concluded it was him after talking to some guys who knew him, claiming that he said he bought a peach carnation anonymously for someone, though they didn't know who. It seemed sufficient information though, so we all got it in our heads that he was the culprit. The following few days, I kinda half expected him to eventually come forward. I watched him fondly from a distance in my art class, though not too obsessively. I certainly never had the balls to go ask him about the flowers. What would I ask anyway? What if my friends and I were wrong in our detective work? That would be pretty awkward. And being the socially anxious creature I was, not even the prospect of having my first boyfriend could prod me towards something so potentially devastating. So I waited, with much patience and empathy. Weeks passed and I was never approached. Despite how exciting it originally felt, it drifted to the back of my mind, and I quietly accepted that we were probably wrong. Either way, it seemed unlikely that my Valentine was ever going to fess up, whoever he was. I eventually had better things to think about, just forgetting about the incident altogether. Fast forward a few more weeks, and I walk into a circle of the popular kids in one of my classes whispering about something. My seat being where it was, I could hear everything that was said. They seemed pretty disturbed, and they were talking about some quiet guy who had left notes in one of his classes that they found. The notes were essentially weird, cryptic poems entailing his desires and plans to shoot up the school, and other horrid material. I never personally saw the notes, but it was very concerning, and as the conversation went on, it became undeniably clear who they were referring to. So when they started trying to remember his name, with repeated failures, I finally spoke up. "Josh?" I attempted timidly, which was met by several surprised looks, and finally, "Yeah, Josh, that's his name." I felt sick and wanted to cry. I don't remember all the details of how things proceeded from there, but eventually I was convinced that no one that knew about this was planning on going to any sort of authority about it. I don't believe I told any other students about what I'd heard, hesitant to start some stupid rumor, but I did tell the school counselor and my parents because I was genuinely scared for my safety. Afterwards, I never heard any follow-up to the whole ordeal, but I never saw Josh again in my life. I assume he was expelled. Frustratingly, none of the details were ever solidly confirmed, but the possibilities still haunt me to this day. Perhaps it's stupid and overly empathetic of me, but I sometimes wonder if his failed attempt to finally make a connection with someone on Valentine's Day was the final straw for him, driving him to thoughts of homicide and whatever else. I hardly feel guilty about it, but it's just another aspect of the whole ordeal that makes me absolutely nauseated to think about. When I was a kid, my mom and stepdad owned their own maintenance company. We lived out in the middle of nowhere in the south. All the neighboring towns were very small, and everyone knew everyone. Because of this, there has always been a heightened sense of trust amongst the community. Every so often, my mom and stepdad would get a job that was just too much for them to accomplish on their own. So when that happened, they would hire local boys, usually from the high school and community college, to help out. Again, we lived in a very small town that still very much believed in Southern hospitality, so it wasn't all that unusual for these boys to be invited over for dinner with my family. John was in his mid-20s and had only recently moved to our town from New York City. John was a bit awkward, but he was a very hard worker, and at first he came across as a very kind-hearted young man. I was 11 when Josh started working for my family. He would come and join us for meals after working for my family all day. My big sister, who was just a few years younger than John, had recently moved out west, and I missed her a lot. So when he began to show interest in me, I was very excited. Look at that. Now I have a big brother figure who thinks my middle school drama is interesting to listen to over dinner. My family really liked John and hired him for the next few jobs that they got. John continued to be very friendly toward me, but I and my family always interpreted it as someone who wanted to be nice to me. September rolls around, and John has worked for my family for a couple months now. My birthday is coming up, and my family promises to take me bowling, which was an hour's drive away, so it was a big deal for me. They tell me this when John is around, and somehow he ends up inviting himself. I remember thinking it was kind of weird, but John had always been nice, and I didn't want to be rude and said I didn't want him around. My family was also heavily involved in the local fire department. Every year we would volunteer to do this haunted hayride event where basically people would dress up like monsters and go out into the woods and scare the guests that came through, with all the money going to the fire department. The event was scheduled to start 2 weeks after my birthday. My mom mentions it to John, and he says that he's really interested in it, and could he help out. My mom, bless her heart, is the sweetest little southern lady and says of course he can, that she'll put him in contact with the man who runs it. Well, John ends up doing it, and plot twist, he ends up being put in the same area as my family and I, because he apparently didn't want to work with strangers. Okay. This is when things started getting pretty weird. Mind you, this event required us working long, late nights out in the woods. In the beginning of the season, there would sometimes be long gaps between groups. The first weekend we had a gap like that. A boy I was friends with was working the next station over, and I told my mom I was going to go say hi to him. I took the path through the woods, so in case the group came through, they wouldn't have seen a small preteen girl covered in fake blood skipping through the woods, because that's hardly scary. As I'm walking, I hear something and turn around. It's John. I asked him what he's doing, and he said he saw me leave and didn't want me to get hurt. I told him that I was fine and that my mom knows where I'm going, and that these woods are very safe. The most dangerous animals around here were deer, He said he didn't feel comfortable with me walking by myself and grabs my arm. This freaked me out when I pulled away and said I was going to go back to our station. The rest of the night, John always managed to show up whenever I was alone to talk to me. I never mentioned this to my mom because I still felt like my dislike for John was rude. I mean, my family liked him, so surely I should too. Fast forward to February. He hasn't been around much because most of the work hasn't required him. But then, on Valentine's Day, I get home and see a vase of red roses in the kitchen. I ask my mom if my stepdad gave them to her, and she says no. She then hands me the card. It says something along the lines of, my name, and then you're the most beautiful girl I've ever seen. I love you. My mom asked me if there were any boys at school who would send me something like that. I told her no. We exchanged carnations at school, and I had never had a boy interested in me. The next week, John swings by, not all that unusual. While he's there, he asked me if I liked my flowers. I played dumb and asked him what flowers, which upset him. I told my mom and she was pissed, and asked him what he was playing at. He insisted it was just a friendly gesture and that he hadn't meant anything by it. He just thought a pretty girl deserved roses on Valentine's Day, he said. My mom told him to never pull shit like that again. So come April, mysterious bouquets of flowers start getting delivered weekly, then almost daily. My mom knew that it must be John. She calls him and tells him to cut it out and that he's not welcome over anymore. My family had a desktop in a room that had several windows. One evening I was downstairs dinking around on the computer when I heard a tap on the window and I looked out, and there's John standing on our porch, smiling with this really creepy smile. I get up and poke my head out of the door and I tell him that my mom doesn't want him coming around. He says he just wants to talk to me. Being a dumb 12-year-old, I step out on the porch. He then proceeds to tell me that he wants to wait for me and that I'm the most beautiful woman he knows and that he loves me, but that he knows I'm too young, so he's willing to wait a few years. I make up some excuse to go back in the house and get my mom. I'm crying at this point, while my mom and stepdad go downstairs and tell him that they will shoot his ass if he doesn't get off of our property right now. He gets pissed off and says they're trying to deny us our love. What the hell? My stepdad says he's serious about getting the gun, so John eventually leaves, but says that they can't keep him away from me. So we go to the cops and we get a restraining order. Remember the whole small town part? Well, turns out small towns don't take well to grown-ass men who harass little girls. John essentially gets driven out of the town and goes back to New York City, and we were all thinking that was going to be the end of it, but then the phone calls start. He would call from prepaid phones and payphones, so the numbers were never consistent. At this point, my mom forbid me from answering the phone unless I knew who it was. Before, I would always answer unknown numbers if I was home alone, because our home phone was also the work phone, so it was usually clients. My mom didn't tell me until much later that the calls were getting continuously more violent and sexual in nature. We would always call the cops, but very little was done. Then things stopped for a while. It seemed like everything was over. I started high school and soon forgot all about creepy John. Boys my own age began to like me and everything seemed to be normal. Until the end of my senior year of high school, a letter came addressed to me, and inside was a horribly graphic letter talking about how I was old enough for him to come back. I was only 16, by the way. And that I had better dump my loser boyfriend because it was time for him to come back in my life. And that he knew I wanted him and he would do whatever it took to make sure that we were reunited. The cops were called again and my school was informed. I only had a month left of term and spent that last month with my teachers, watching me like a hawk. My mom insisted on coming to pick me up every day. I didn't have my own car at the time and I wasn't allowed to leave with anyone else. We get a call from the cops a few weeks later telling us that John has been arrested for unrelated charges, but that they can't disclose more than that. I thought that would be the end of it. Since I graduated so young, I didn't leave for university until the next year. 17, about to turn 18. I moved a few hours away and landed a pretty sweet acting gig the fall that I moved. In October, 2 scary things happened in 1 week. Another letter arrived at my mom's house, just as scary and threatening as the first. Then on my job, which largely involved a lot of audience interaction, a lady handed me a note at the end of the run. I was confused but kept it. only to open it in the dressing room. It was addressed to me, using my full name, inviting me to meet up with her and her friend. We didn't have any programs that listed names, and I had never seen her before. I have no clue if it was related to John at all, but given that he had just made contact again, I was incredibly shaken up by it. I hadn't heard from him since. I've moved again since that last letter. I don't know if he's still in jail. I certainly hope so. I just hope that, as traumatic as all that was for me, he never pursued or, heaven forbid, attacked any other young girls.